Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And if you listen to the show, leave us that rating and review. I want to hear what you love about the show and any tips, insights, or tricks that stand out that can make you work harder for your investing goals. Now, we've got a good one today. We're going to be talking to a guy I've known for a while, but first time having him on the show, Mr. Joe Cornwell. Joe Cornwell was a full-time police officer from 2012 to 2021, beginning his real estate investing by doing a live-in flip from 2011 to 2014. Now, he started buying rental properties in 2017, and ultimately, he now focuses on deep BRRRR properties on small to mid-sized multifamilies in Cincinnati, Ohio. He has 75 doors, 5 full-time contractors, and 1 full-time assistant. Let's welcome to the show, Joe Cornwell.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, Joe, listen, great to get you on the show. I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I was a full-time police officer from 2011 to 2021. I started basically learning about buy and hold real estate in 2015. The only thing I'd really done before that was a personal kind of live-in flip. And I didn't know anything about real estate. So I didn't know it was a live-in flip, but basically I bought a crappy house in 2011 when the market, was still super cheap. Fixed it up mainly myself, just kind of DIY. And that's what kind of got me into the construction background with, learning how to do things and not having the money to hire people. So, I kind of had to learn how to do cabinets and drywall and tile and things like that. But took a kind of a crappy house, made it a lot nicer. And then when I sold it in 2014 to buy my next personal residence, I made money and I was like, okay, there might be something to this real estate thing if I actually learn what I'm doing. So at the time, I just started educating myself, started listening to podcasts, started watching YouTube videos, getting on different real estate forums at the time, started reading all the real estate books I could find. And that basically made me focus on buy and hold real estate. And again, I was still a full-time police officer, started buying rental properties. It took me almost 2 years to find that first deal and save enough capital in the meantime to do it. So I bought a duplex in 2017, and then I kind of started scaling up from there using the BRRRR method up until 2021, where I retired from the law enforcement job. And I have a real estate agent sales business and a general contracting business, both based in Cincinnati, that are now my full-time, job. And I'm still investing full-time as well.
Well, listen, thank you for all your work, serving your city. And congratulations on making that transition from, working full-time to now being a full-time entrepreneur. You mentioned that you started really by doing that live and flip and then educating yourself, right? Once you made money on that, you said, wait a minute, if I actually figured out what I was doing, I could probably really make a lot more money doing this. So you started with educations from podcasts to books to videos, and then ultimately focused on kind of the BRRRR strategies and more of this long-term investing. You talked about buying a duplex in 2017, and then just 4 years later, 2021, you were able to walk away from the day job. Walk me through some of the strategies that you employed to go from buying that first duplex that set you up to walk away from the day job just 4 years later.
Yeah. So kind of what transitioned me into buy and hold is I looked at wholesaling. I learned about that. I looked at flipping. Obviously I had done the one live-in flip. And to me, outside of buy and hold, everything seemed like a business or a job. And while those were great, and I thought that if I really focused on it, I might be profitable. I was already working, 40, 50 hours a week as a cop. I didn't really want another job. So I ultimately looked at developing buy and hold real estate, to be able to actually get a return on my invested. And I looked at it in the sense of if I scaled this out big enough, even without at the time really planning to retire early, I said, if I can scale this up, I can hopefully get it to a point where I can hire and put the right people in place where I'm not working, very many hours a week just to manage my portfolio. I also looked around in the law enforcement scape. Obviously we all remember in 2015 up until today, the law enforcement career in general across the country hasn't been a very positive place to be. So I saw that trend continuing to get worse, which ultimately we've all seen that play out. And, I kind of knew early on, 5 years, let's say, into my career, that this probably wasn't something I want to do for the next 30 years. And I looked at a lot of the older officers who, had been cops for 25, 30, 35 years. And the nicest way I can put it is very few of them were happy, healthy, and a picture of where I wanted to be in 25 or 30 years. So that was all kind of my motivation at the time to get into buy and hold real estate. And I didn't really know what the BRRRR method was that we all, kind of come to know now, but I realized that it took me 2 years to save the money with my W-2 job to buy that first deal. And I knew if I wanted to scale up, then that wasn't a very scalable model, right? I think I was saving like $500 a month at the time. So that led me into getting my real estate license, which ultimately led me into general contracting. And I can obviously talk more about those paths as well. But I knew I had to scale up my income that wasn't directly tied to my time, like my W-2 job was. And I knew that I had to be able to recycle my money to help grow it instead of, just saving 25% down every time I wanted to buy a property.
So listen, Joe, you just gave some very valuable insights, and I want to make sure our listeners fully understood what you said, because this is really, really key. First and foremost, you said, as you looked at the landscape of real estate investing, in your eyes, buy and hold investing was really the only true form of passive investing. Everything else felt like another job. Wholesaling, flipping, all those other things felt like work. You were going to be trading one 40-hour work week for another 40-hour work week. So having a clear vision and goal is key if you're going to make that transition. Know what you actually want. Don't just switch one job for another job. So that was the first key. The second thing is that you didn't have the passive income to just simply keep repeating this BRRRR. Saving $500 a month, that's only going to get you so far to $6,000 a year. Not a whole lot of properties you're going to be able to buy with $6,000. So what you did instead was you focused on complementary revenue streams within real estate, getting your real estate license, becoming an agent, focusing on the construction side, construction management. So now all these things are still within the real estate realm, but you're making money doing different things. So by focusing that way, now you can start to make that transition faster, and you have other ways to make money within real estate as opposed to just buy and hold. So now you can take that additional income and then put it right back into additional properties. So if you are looking to make that transition, I think a lot of people just wait to save and save and save and then buy. But what you're talking about, Joe, and what you've been able to do is find complementary revenue streams that are still tied to real estate, but not exactly just saving your money and buying. Figure out how else you can make money within real estate so you can take that additional income and put it back into properties. Getting your license is certainly one way. Being a contractor, if you have that skill set, if you have the time to manage properties, that's another way. But there are other things you can do as well, whether that is, again, maybe you wholesale just to put money back into real estate, or there's other strategies or tasks. But the key is you have to have a clear vision of what you're ultimately trying to do, and then figure out what are some other ways that can help you get there faster. Joe, as you started to explore that, I know you've got your Realty One Stop that you have now, which you offer these different services. Talk to me a little bit more about who you help and how you help with this suite of services.
Yeah, so I got my real estate license in 2016 as I was still educating, and at the time, my plan was simply to have my license so I could go out and buy my own real estate, or if I had to, offload a property, I could sell my own real estate. At the time, that was basically as far as I thought. What kind of organically happened through that process, and just one thing I've been consistent about, well, I don't want to say consistent, but one thing I've done since the beginning was trying to promote, or at least discuss what I'm doing on social media. So it started with Facebook. I think that was like the only social media I was on at the time, but just simply saying, hey, I'm going to real estate school, hey, I'm getting my license. Hey, I'm buying this first property. Just kind of documenting what I was doing kind of organically led me into so many different, paths that have ultimately helped me succeed. So basically getting that real estate license and representing myself to buy my own first couple properties led me to other people seeing what I was doing and saying like, hey, I'm interested in real estate. Could you help me find a property? And it kind of grew into a business that, again, I didn't necessarily plan in the beginning. But when I realized like, hey, my dollar per hour on the sales business is way higher than my dollar per hour on the police job, I kind of, light bulb went off like, hey, if I actually put some time and effort into learning how to sell real estate, marketing my skills, and helping people buy and sell real estate, then I could accelerate my income and accelerate growing my investment portfolio. So that was kind of the first step in the Realty One Stop, company. Again, not with all this grand design in mind, but it kind of all happened organically. And then just simply buying real estate and having to hire and fire contractors. I realized there was such a void in the market of reliable contractors who were honest, who knew what they were doing, who didn't steal your money, who didn't lie about what, they had, the work they completed. So basically getting ripped off a couple of times quickly made me realize that, hey, if I'm dealing with this as an investor, I guarantee you there's a lot of other homeowners and investors out there in my market that have the same need. And that kind of quickly made me realize that if I want to scale this to the goals that I've set for myself, I need to have more control of this process. And the only way I can control this process is to have hourly employees who are basically a partnership, right? They rely on me every week for a check, and I rely on them to show up, do good work, and be honest. Which then ultimately grew into, just like the real estate business, the sales business grew into people calling me, hey, I need this, hey, I need this. And they weren't just working for me at the time. I was able to contract them out and do basically general contracting, third party for other investors and other just regular homeowners. And again, all of that just kind of organically grew as the demands in the market.
I think recognizing that the challenges you faced were probably challenges that other people were facing as well was very insightful. And to recognize that, hey, why don't I solve this for me, but also solve it for other people? That way, again, as an entrepreneur, that's what entrepreneurs do, right? You solve problems that typically show up in your own life first, and then you figure out, hey, or maybe other people are having this problem. And that's exactly what you did. I'm curious, your background in law enforcement, do you think it helps you with kind of managing the construction side of the business? Because we're talking, blue collar workers, hourly. I know that, you gotta have to stay on top of that to make sure everyone's doing what they're supposed to do and being timely with it. How does that background help?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know if the law enforcement background helped directly, but I think some of the skill sets that you have to be a successful police officer definitely translate to real estate sales and general contracting, because you have to be a little bit extroverted. If you're not comfortable talking to people publicly, then you're going to have a difficulty in sales or any sort of customer service, customer interaction. You have to be assertive. You have to be confident. I mean, there's a lot of things that do translate just on like a personality standpoint. And obviously, I think that people who are in the real estate space see there's so many cops, that at the time I was like, I'm probably the only cop in the world that's ever, went from being a cop to real estate. And like, now I've talked to dozens of cops who are on very similar paths to me. And there's a lot of other, kind of influencer people out there who were started in law enforcement and went into real estate. So I think seeing that trait, that those traits that are common between most police officers, it can help them be successful in real estate.
It's interesting you talk about just other police officers, going from real estate or going from, law enforcement to real estate. And this is a conversation I've had with a few other kind of community service professionals, right? So firefighters, teachers, other folks who, maybe have some concerns on whether or not the pension is going to be there, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 10 years from now at this point. But what would you say to some of those folks, right? Your fellow officers, your fellow firefighters, the teachers, union jobs, kind of the blue collar fabric of America, who are looking to kind of create some of that same flexibility or freedom in their finances? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think that anytime you're relying on somebody else or some other entity to basically take care of you, I don't want to put it like that. Obviously, if you have a pension or Social Security, you're paying into it, you deserve it. I'm not saying that, but I was in a position where I looked at the next 20, 30 years and I had concerns. I do study economics. I do study politics a little bit, and just enough to kind of, I think it overlaps with our business that we're in. And it's important to understand kind of the macro view of it. So even at that time, starting in 2015, 2016, when I first started, like I knew it was important to understand those things. And I knew reading and following what was happening and kind of the trajectory of it with Social Security and like the state of Ohio Police and Fire pension, the teacher fund, all those things were not in good shape, and they hadn't even recovered from the last crash. And obviously now, fast forward 6 years, we're heading into a likely another recession where it could take another big hit. And the point of all that is I didn't want to be reliant on other people managing my money for me that were going to ultimately determine my quality of life. And so at that time, I, made the decision where I need to get control of my own finances and my own future and my, family's future and security. And I don't think that's easy. I think it's difficult for people to, especially if they're not following it, if they're not paying attention to it, it's hard to wrap your head around that. But I think everyone should have at least understand that and understand their risk and their exposure. And hopefully that will lead them to doing some things that will help shore up their financial position, even if it's not, going full time into another business or, any sort of investing type.
No, Joe, I appreciate that. Listen, I got a quick request for all of our listeners here. If you know one of those community service providers we talked about, police officers, firefighters, teachers, anyone who services your community, and you're a little concerned about their future, or you're that person, share this episode with them. I think it all starts with awareness that this is possible, awareness that you can invest without having hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And that awareness is key. So share this episode with them so they can start to at least wrap their head around it. Joe, going back to where you started, it was really through that education. And that is so key, from podcasts, books, videos, whatever it is to take. But you have to be aware that this is possible, then start to wrap your head around it. And then you can make that transition into taking action. Speaking of taking action, recently you closed on a 28 unit building. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Talk to me a little bit more about that acquisition. I believe this is the biggest property in your portfolio at this point, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I've been looking for a mid-sized multifamily, and my definition of that is 20 to 80 units. Basically, I define it as big enough that it's not something you're usually going to buy, at least in my position, you're not going to buy by yourself, but small enough where you're not going to have on-site management or maintenance. So that's kind of my definition. And I've heard, different
and why do you go with those guardrails?
Well, so when I was looking at kind of my next steps as an investor, that was just the niche I wanted to fall in, because, a lot of the bigger investors are syndicators or large partnerships, or, have hedge funding, things like that, where I don't want to compete with those people because they have a lot more capital than I do, or access to capital than I do. And typically they're not really looking in that, 20 to 80 range. Now, I think in recent years with the competition, they have kind of downsized in what they're looking at, but historically that wasn't really their appetite. But it's also usually bigger than kind of the typical mom and pop or solo investors. A lot of people who are still working full-time jobs aren't really looking to get in that space typically. So I thought it might have less competition. It wasn't really the case. I think it's actually very competitive in that space, probably even more so than the small multifamily space. But anyway, at the time, about 2 or 3 years ago, I started really focusing on trying to find a deal in that. And it took me, push almost 3 years to actually get a contract and close on a mid-sized multifamily deal. On that deal, I was able to bring in a partnership who put up most of the money, and my experience with the real estate and construction side of it is basically my piece of that partnership and operating the deal from, contract to our disposition, which will probably hopefully be a cash out refi here in the next 3 or 4 years. That's kind of the plan. And anyway, that's my end of it, is managing it the day to day.
You mentioned that it took 3 years to find this property. You said between 20 and 80 units. So it took 3 years to find this property. Obviously, there's a lot of competition in there. One, why do you think it took so long? And then two, what do you say about just kind of the perseverance and patience to kind of stick with it and continue to look, as opposed to maybe changing strategies and saying, okay, well, I can't find it. Let me find something else, or let me change this completely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was still buying during that whole time, so it wasn't like I just took 3 years off and was waiting to see what happened. It was, if a good deal came along in that, smaller multifamily space, I was still buying. But my main goal was to find a deal like this. But I think the reasons why it took so long are several reasons. One, in the Cincinnati market, there's just not a lot of inventory in that space. I don't know the exact numbers, but I've seen a lot of the inventory out there. And if I had to kind of guesstimate a number, it's probably less than 10% of the multifamily market, meaning that there's a ton of small stuff and there's a good chunk of big stuff, meaning 100 plus. but that mid-side range is a very small percentage of the multifamily inventory. So that was one issue. There's just not a lot out there. Two, a lot of it is family held stuff, so some of the mom and pop type owners who have owned it from the 60s, 70s, 80s and on. And a lot of times, because I had done direct marketing, I talked to a lot of those people. A lot of times they're just holding it and they're going to inherit it to their kids. So there's not a lot of turnover in that space as well. So there's a lot of factors going against me. And then when things did come up, I was obviously underwriting it and making offers. But, as we all know, if you follow real estate, that kind of 2019 to 2022 multifamily market was just red hot on fire. Everybody was trying to do that and get into that space or continue buying and growing in that space. So it was very competitive. I would make offers that I thought were fair or even over, market value, and somebody else might pay 10, 20% more than I would. So it was just difficult to actually land a deal. And I think to get this 28 unit, all the stars just kind of had to align. And that's ultimately what happened.
To that point, I mean, what do you think was different in this case? So did you change anything, or was this just a matter of, hey, you just keep nailing that hammer, at some point it's going to go through, or what was the difference here?
Yeah, there was a lot of factors, but it was a relationship with another broker that I had built. We had done some deals together on the sales side. I'd sold and represented clients on the sale. So I had a relationship with the broker. It was listed though, it was on market. So it wasn't like it was an off market pocket listing or anything like that. But I was one of the first conversations with that deal when it was ready to hit the market. So getting in early and having those, relationships with the brokers who control that space or whatever space you're trying to be in, the gatekeepers, so to speak, you want to have relationships with those people. But two, it was a deal that they didn't really market as a big value add deal, but like, if you know what you're looking at, and obviously now with the construction background, I knew looking at that deal that it was kind of a lipstick on a pig type of deal. The previous owners had done some rehabs, but it was like everything was as cheap as they possibly could. Like I knew looking at that deal at the first walkthrough, looking at the exterior, like I know what bad work looks like, and almost all of the work done to that property was bad work. It was, again, like if I had to guess, they were probably putting $1,500, $2,000 into turnovers, like, and that's just not the quality that I do in my business. And I knew it would turn a lot of buyers away. I knew the buyers who weren't willing to do a really heavy lift on a property weren't going to want that deal. So I knew there was a lot of factors, and obviously we were in a rising interest rate environment, right? I got that under contract at now, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago. But, if you look at January 22 up to June of 22, when I got that in contract, the rates had already risen quite a bit in that space. So I knew all those factors were going to give me a really good opportunity to get the deal under contract.
Now, some really good insights right there. First and foremost, you talk about that relationship with the broker. Even though it was listed, you were one of the first people to kind of express interest. You had an established relationship from doing some transactions together. And that comes down to credibility. You had strong credibility with this other broker. So when you were talking to them, they knew that you were a credible buyer. I think that's really key, particularly in a competitive market. The second thing you talked about was, seeing an opportunity that maybe other people miss. They didn't really market it as a value add, more of lipstick. You saw that there were more renovations needed, and the way the property showed maybe just wasn't as advantageous for the current owner, but that was a great opportunity for you. And then the third thing was the rising interest rates. So maybe the way people were underwriting the deal or their expectations changed, and that kind of gave you an opportunity to come in and maybe, do a deal where maybe that owner holds out next time, but instead they probably realize, hey, you know what, the offers may not get better. We better take this and make it work. How are you structuring your debt on that deal in this, higher interest rate environment?
Yeah, so we used a loan broker. Shout out to Kurt Wheel if you're in Cincinnati or this region. He's a great loan broker, and happy to, we can give that contact info. He got us a great deal. So he shopped our loan. We ended up going with a regional bank based in Indiana, but they did a 20% down, so 80% loan to value. They did 18 months interest only, and they gave us a big line of credit on the renovation costs. So, terms wise, I couldn't be happier. I think it was like low fives. So, at that time when rates were jumping up, in the mid to high fives, we were still able to get a relatively aggressive rate Obviously it wasn't the 3 and 4% that we had been seeing, the past couple of years, but still for our underwriting, it was a good rate.
No, it's awesome to hear and appreciate that feedback. And again, having that team is really key too. So, if you're trying to get deals done, if you've been working hard, looking for the last couple of years, trying to get these multis, now is actually a really good time to stay aggressive with your relationships, your broker relationships, other owners, team members, particularly mortgage brokers as well. You need to understand exactly what your lending options look like today. But that's what allowed you to get that done, right? Being somewhat patient, continue to do deals in the marketplace, continue to build relationships, and then recognizing when there was an opportunity and pouncing on that. So kudos to you and congratulations on getting that deal done. What's next for you?
Yeah, so I'm still looking for the mid-sized multifamily. I mean, that's a space I want to stay in. At this point in my career, I've been fortunate to kind of hit that level 1 financial freedom where my cash flow offsets all of my expenses. Obviously, I'm still growing my businesses, and I'm using that income to continue growing my portfolio. But for me, at the path I'm on right now, and where I see myself in that kind of mid-sized multifamily space, is through partnerships. That's kind of my goal. I don't really want to grow. At least at this point, I have no plans to syndicate. I'm not looking to do the 100, 200 unit plus type of deals. I'm looking at that mid-sized multifamily. And for me, and maybe this is a flaw, I'm sure some people obviously have different perspective, but for me, I am kind of a control freak. And especially when you're talking about bringing other people's money into a deal that I'm ultimately responsible for, if I'm, kind of the operating partner in these joint ventures where I'm the one handling all the day-to-day, finding the deals, putting them together. I feel responsible for, whoever partners with me if they're putting money into a deal. And I personally can't feel confident in the outcome of a deal if I'm investing remotely. If I'm investing all over the country, that's why I stay, kind of in the greater Cincinnati region, because I want to be able to see and taste and touch it. I want to be able to put my team in place on the deal, so we self-manage our entire portfolio. I don't want, the way I look at it is like my model, you can't have any excuses, right? Like I can't say, oh, well, the manager didn't, get that leased out in time, or, oh, the manager didn't, we didn't know that they weren't paying rent for 6 months. Like all of that flows through my business directly, the things I'm involved in day to day. And obviously my model has been heavy value add type of BRRRR type of deals where I don't trust putting a heavy lift in place by trying to hire contractors from across the country. So all of that's to say, what fits in that model and what I can kind of scale with is doing these mid-sized multifamilies that I can basically keep total management and renovation in-house. And again, if there's any failures, then it's going to be kind of fall on me, and that's just the way I'm looking at it, and the way I want to continue growing is through those partnerships.
Joe, for listeners who want to reach out to you, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, so I'm happy to share my social media. I have a link tree. I can, if you can post it, and my email is jcornwell@realtyonestop.com. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to chat. And I think that's in the link tree as well, if you want to post that.
All right. We'll definitely link to that in the show notes. So just scroll to the show notes and you'll see both of those links right there. Joe, we're going to go to a round of insights. You ready?
Awesome. Yep.
Give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
Yeah, I mean, back to what we talked about with hiring contractors, I think that was on my first deal. I did not have any extra capital to make mistakes, I hired like the worst contractor I possibly could have, and I made all the mistakes that a lot of new investors make where, he basically wanted money every week and he wasn't getting things done. I wasn't checking the work thoroughly enough. There was things that he just flat out didn't do, and there was things that he did wrong that I paid for. And at the end of the day, it was like probably a $3,000 to $4,000 loss that I took, where at that time, that was like all the money in the world that I had, right? So obviously that set me up to realize that I either had to get better at hiring contractors or I needed to build out my own contracting company where I had more control of the situation and could scale it up, within my own business. So that ultimately led me down that path to building out the general contracting company. So I'm glad I made that mistake and had that failure, but it was definitely painful at the time.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Yeah, I would say probably one of the biggest lifesavers has just been QuickBooks. I mean, I still keep my own books, and I have an assistant now who helps with it. But being able to keep all of my properties books separated, every property has their own books, has saved me probably hundreds or thousands of hours over the years, because I used to do like the receipt and Excel model, and then I would input every single receipt into a Excel spreadsheet, and every year at the end of the when it was time for taxes, I was spending like weeks trying to get my books ready for tax time. So QuickBooks isn't cheap, but it's worth the money, and especially as you start scaling with multiple properties, you're going to really want that software to help you save your time.
Give me the book that you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
The last year, I would say the most recent book that really had an impact on me, I've been recommending a lot, was Good to Great. I think that was one of the last business books that I read. And for me, as someone who's scaling, two businesses right now, it was just kind of one of those where I read it right at the right time, and it really helped me realize some of the things I was doing that good companies don't do, and helped me set a path to be a great company, in the future. So if you're a business owner, I definitely recommend it if you haven't read that one.
What's a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals?
Oh man, that's tough. I wish I was a lot better at it. Something that I have done in the past that I need to be more consistent about is, I don't necessarily want to call it journaling. I think some people call it that, but basically having written goals that you review on a schedule. And so like whether that's daily, weekly, I feel like every year, and sometimes even like every quarter, like I'll get, we all want to, all right, I'm going to start over. I'm going to get super organized. I'm going to get super focused. And then I'll do that for like 2 or 3 weeks, where every day I'm writing down my daily goals, things I have to accomplish, weekly goals, monthly goals, yearly goals. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, you get busy, you miss it for a day. And it's like going to the gym, right? It's like as soon as you stop going for a week, it's on the back burner. So, but I think to summarize it, just having written goals that you're reviewing. And I don't think it has to be daily, but you need to set a schedule that works for you and what you're trying to accomplish.
Give me your number one insight for investing.
Oh man. Well, this is something I've been having this conversation a lot with clients and other investors, but I think that if you look back at what I did in 2015, right before I even started investing, having really crystal clear goals is the most important thing, because having crystal clear goals is going to dictate how you go about accomplishing them and the path that you're going to go down. Something I hear a lot from new investors is like, well, I want to be wealthy or I want to be rich. It's like, well, what does that mean? And what does that look like? Because if you're not defining those things specifically, you can't set metrics that are attainable to set a path to achieve, right? And it's like, let's just say your goal is 1,000 units, right? You have to start somewhere, and you have to know why you want to get there. Because if you don't have all those things established specifically, then you're not going to be able to take the steps to get there. So anyway, I think goal setting is probably the most important thing, especially for new investors that are just starting the journey.
All right. And we're going to lighten the mood. You are local right here in Cincinnati with me. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Oh man, that's tough. I love to eat. Man, I mean, I feel like I got to pick something specific to Cincinnati because, I hate like if you're traveling, I feel like you got to eat something that, is specific to that place. Don't go somewhere you can get anywhere. I would say probably my favorite, if I'm trying to spend some money on a meal, my favorite place in Cincinnati is the Precinct. So it's one of the Jeff Ruby restaurants, and I know he has restaurants in different cities, but if you're ever in Cincinnati, the Precinct, for whatever reason, I've been to a bunch of different Jeff Ruby's. That is like just better food. Everything about it's better. I don't know why, but you got to check it out. And it's an old police station, so having the cop thing is kind of cool to see all that old police memorabilia too.
I was going to say, it's not ironic that the former police officer picks the Precinct as his favorite restaurant.
It is good, man. It's so good.
Hey, Joe, listen, man, great insights. I really appreciate you sharing your journey, really going from being a police officer to investing in real estate and kind of building up your real estate portfolio, not just with your passive income and your properties, which I think is key and great, but also recognizing that, to wait just for that may take too long. So building up these complementary businesses, as a, real estate agent, building up the contracting business, that really allowed you to make that transition sooner. So great insight for all of our listeners, and also giving us some tips for a lot of our community professionals to understand how they can start to insulate themselves if that is something that they're looking to do. But then also, as you're looking to scale, how to be patient, how to stand out, and how to win that first big deal. So congratulations again to you, Joe. I'm sure we'll be in touch and see each other soon. I want to thank you again for coming on Multifamily Insights, and I hope you have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.